Police surrounded my brother for fishing on our own lake. The morning the HOA called 911 on my disabled brother just for fishing our own lake, I knew something bigger was hiding under the surface. What started as doubt turned into a storm of lies, tension, and a $4 million reveal that shook our whole valley. If you've ever stood your ground against the wrong kind of power, drop a justice and subscribe. You'll want to see how this one ends. The first hint of sunrise drifted over Silver Basin Lake, brushing the rippling surface with a pale orange glow. That hour, right before the world wakes up, had always been my favorite. You can hear things then. The slow creak of pine branches, the gentle tap of water against the dock posts, the soft whir of my brother Evan's wheelchair motor as he eased himself into position at the end of the pier like he'd done 100 times since returning from Afghanistan. He cast his line with that quiet focus he'd learned overseas, the kind that doesn't shake easily. It was peaceful, clean, the kind of peace only a Montana lake at dawn can give. His breath puffed white in the chill air. A thermos of coffee steamed beside him. Not a single sound of trouble anywhere. Then the engines came. Not the soft hum of a passing truck on the county road. No. This was something else entirely. 3 engines, big ones, kicking gravel into the air like a stampede. The rumble grew louder, sharper, until red and blue lights cut through the tree line and splashed across the dock. The peaceful dawn shattered like glass. I stepped out of my workshop, wiping grease from my hands, confused as hell. For a second, I thought maybe there'd been a wreck on the road. But the cruisers weren't stopping there. They were barreling straight toward our lake, our land, our family's property. Evan froze, his fishing rod suspended mid-air. "Cole," he called out, trying to sound calm. "You seeing this?" The deputies climbed out fast, hands on belts, scanning the shoreline like they were approaching an armed suspect instead of a man missing both legs who just wanted to catch trout before breakfast. "Sir, keep your hands visible," one of them shouted. Evan's jaw worked, and I saw the flicker of pain he tried to hide. "I'm fishing," he said evenly, "on my own property." I walked toward them, boots crunching on the frost-covered dirt. "Officers," I said, forcing my voice steady, "there must be some misunderstanding. This lake belongs to my family, has since 1964. One deputy adjusted his vest, not looking convinced. "We received a call about an armed trespasser at the lake. Description matches him." He pointed to Evan. "Armed?" Evan lifted the only thing he was holding, his fishing pole. "Only weapon I've got is a bad cast." But I already knew who'd made that call. Because for the past 3 weeks, Lydia Harrow, the brand new queen of the Willow Ridge HOA, had been circling our fence line like a hawk looking for something to steal. Clipboard always in hand, expensive boots barely touching the dirt, perfume strong enough to gag a bull. She'd been itching to pull a stunt like this. "Who made the report?" I asked. The deputy hesitated. That was enough of an answer. Behind him, the lake mist rolled low over the water, turning the whole scene eerie. 3 patrol cars, flashing lights reflecting off the lake like someone had shattered a neon sign into the water. "Officers," I repeated, "you're standing on Mercer land, and you've just surrounded my brother, who risked his life for this country, because someone out here doesn't know the meaning of boundaries." The lead deputy glanced back at the cruisers, shifting uneasily. He wasn't a bad man, just caught in something he wasn't prepared for. "Sir, he said, "we still have to verify ownership." "That's fine," Juan, I said. "Give me 30 seconds and I'll bring you the deed." But as I walked back toward the house, something inside me went cold. This wasn't a simple mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the opening shot in a fight Lydia Harrow thought she could win. When I returned with the framed deed my grandfather hung in his workshop, the deputy's expression changed the moment he saw the date and seal. He knew the call had been a lie. He knew they'd been used. But protocol is protocol, and paperwork is paperwork, so he cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Mercer, we'll file this as a false report." He didn't say Lydia's name. He didn't have to. As the cruisers backed down the drive, tires grinding over the frost, Evan reeled in his line with a tired sigh. "She really did it," he muttered. "Called the cops on a man fishing at his own lake." I looked out over the water, still glassy, still shining under the rising sun, and felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not fear, not even anger. Resolve. Because if Lydia Harrow wanted a fight over Mercer Lake, she'd just made the worst mistake of her life, and she had no idea how far this was about to go. 3 weeks before the police sirens shattered our morning, the trouble had walked straight down my gravel drive in a pair of spotless leather boots. The kind you buy to impress people, not to walk on Montana dirt. I remember the weather that afternoon. Dry wind sweeping across the basin, kicking dust around the old fence posts, ruffling the tall grass near the shoreline like some invisible warning. I was repairing the hinges on the boathouse door when I heard the sharp click of heels approaching. No neighbor in Silver Basin walked like that. I turned and saw her, Lydia Harrow, the newly elected president of the Willow Ridge HOA. Perfect posture, perfect blazer, perfectly artificial smile that looked like it had been ironed onto her face. She didn't bother greeting me. Instead, she lifted a tablet as if reading a holy proclamation. "Mr. Mercer," she began, her voice tipped with forced sweetness. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding regarding the lake." I wiped my hands on a rag. "What kind of misunderstanding?" She stepped across the property line like she owned it, the wind fluttering her printed scarf. "According to our HOA boundary map, the western half of Silver Basin Lake is designated as community commons, which means your personal use of it is unfortunately out of compliance." I had to blink, twice. "Ma'am, that lake's been in my family for 59 years. Lydia tapped her screen, tap, 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 like she was correcting a misbehaving child. "Our updated map supersedes older documents. The previous owners of the surrounding parcels must not have realized the lake extended into HOA jurisdiction." I almost laughed. My grandfather dug the basin himself with a backhoe in 1964, before any of these houses were even built. I walked into the workshop and returned with the old framed deed, the same one I'd later show the deputies. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil, like everything my grandfather ever touched. The embossed seal glimmered under the afternoon sun. I held it out for her. "Every inch of this lake sits on Mercer land. Always has." She skimmed it for less than a second before shrugging. "These could be outdated or replicated." She didn't say forged, but the implication hit like a slap. "I'll need our attorney to authenticate it." Wind rolled off the lake then, cool, steady, carrying the faint scent of algae and pine, and pushed her scarf into her face. She peeled it away with irritation before continuing. "In the meantime," she said, "I'll be filing to correct the boundary lines. It's standard procedure." "Correct?" I echoed. "They were never wrong." Her eyes narrowed, lips tightening as if the word wrong was an insult she wasn't used to hearing. "Mr. Mercer, you'll find that Willow Ridge has very clear standards about lake access. Fishing without community approval is strictly prohibited. Dock structures must meet HOA design guidelines, and any motorized equipment, such as your brother's wheelchair ramp, requires architectural review approval." "My brother's ramp is medical equipment," I said, doing my best to keep my voice level. "It's not a pergola." Lydia's smile sharpened. "Rules apply equally to everyone, even to families with special circumstances." The word hung in the air like a cold breath. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. She saw it and enjoyed it. "You'll receive written notices soon," she added lightly. We'll sort everything out once the boundary adjustments are complete. She turned to leave, heels clicking confidently down the path, as if she'd already won. As if she'd just informed a rancher he'd been mistaken about owning his own barn. But then she paused at the old wooden gate, the one my grandfather built by hand and carved our name into. "You know," she said, glancing back over her shoulder, "your property is quite lovely. It's a shame it hasn't been integrated into the community sooner." Integrated. Like we were some stray piece of land waiting to be absorbed. She walked off, dust swirling around her ankles, leaving behind an unsettling silence that settled deep in my gut. That night, Evan rolled up beside me on the dock, the moonlight casting long shadows across the water. "She's after the lake," he said quietly. "I can feel it." I watched the ripples glisten under the silver moon. "Yeah," I murmured, "and she thinks she can take it." Evan cast his line again, the bobber landing with a soft plunk. The air was cool, peaceful, deceptively calm. But something about Lydia's confidence bothered me more than her words. She wasn't bluffing. She was planning. And by the time we discovered what she was really planning, the survey stakes, the fabricated maps, and the first wave of bogus violation letters had already begun. The next morning, a new sign stood facing our driveway. Fresh wood, bright paint, hammered into the ground overnight. HOA notice. Lake access under review. Evan stared at it in disbelief. "She's rewriting maps, Cole," he said. "Who does that? Someone who thinks nobody will stop her. Someone who believes she's untouchable. And someone who had no idea that she had just declared war on the Mercers." The days after Lydia planted that Lake access under review sign felt like walking into a storm you couldn't quite see yet. But you could hear it rolling over the ridge, gathering force. At first it was small things. A white SUV, HOA patrol, creeping past our gate twice a day, then 4 times. Someone photographing the shoreline, someone measuring the distance between our dock posts and the waterline with an orange tape measure like they were inspecting a crime scene. Then came the first letter, a thin envelope slapped onto our old iron mailbox, flapping in the wind like it wanted to escape. Evan brought it in, his hands steady despite the strain on his face. I sliced it open with my pocket knife, the blade catching the dry afternoon sun. "Violation notice, shoreline contamination. Fine, $250 reason. Unapproved fishing equipment stored in the common use waterfront area. Common use, the same lie she'd tried selling me on day 1. I walked outside and stared at our dock, a simple wooden platform built by my father, its boards worn smooth by decades of bare feet and fish scales. Evan's tackle box sat beside his chair like it always did. It wasn't trash. It wasn't hazardous. It wasn't even on their land. But that was just the beginning. 2 days later, another letter arrived, then another. Noise complaints. Unauthorized construction. Illegal personal vehicle parked near the waterfront. That last one? Evan's wheelchair-accessible van. The wind picked up that evening, sending pine needles skittering across the porch as if trying to warn us. Evan rolled up beside me, looking toward the road, where a pair of headlights approached slowly. Too slowly. "That's the 3rd time today," he muttered. The SUV eased to a stop by our gate. The driver leaned out, snapping photos of the ramp attached to our boathouse walkway. Evan exhaled sharply. "That ramp cost me 3 months of paperwork. VA approval, county permission, contractor certification, and now they're calling it a structure. Because to her, everything's a violation if she wants it to be." We stood there watching the SUV crawl away, gravel crunching under its tires, the smell of its exhaust mixing with the sharp scent of lake water. Behind us, the old wooden gate creaked in the rising wind, a sound that always reminded me of my grandfather. as if the land itself was uneasy. Later that night, another envelope arrived. Hand-delivered, shoved under the front door. Notice of investigation. Possible unauthorized recreational activity. Possible trespassing. Possible environmental disturbance. Evan shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. Trespassing. On our own property. I felt something twist deep inside. Anger, yes, but also something colder. A warning. Lydia wasn't operating on annoyance or petty neighbor drama. She was operating with intent, purpose. This was pressure, applied slowly, repeatedly, strategically. She was trying to break us down. The next morning, I found bright orange survey stakes hammered into the ground near the north fence line. Their neon plastic ribbons flapped violently in the stiff wind coming off the lake. The stakes weren't ours. I never ordered a survey. Evan wheeled over, stopping beside one of them. You didn't call a surveyor? No. Then who did? I didn't need to answer. Across the lake, on the opposite shore, a group of homeowners stood in a cluster, whispering among themselves. They looked over their shoulders when I stepped into view. Not hostile, just uneasy, avoidant. A few days ago, they'd been friendly enough to wave when passing by. Now nobody wanted to be seen talking to a Mercer, because someone had poisoned the water long before she tried poisoning the lake. That afternoon, while repairing a loose board on the dock, a neighbor named Harold approached. Old rancher, soft-spoken, the kind of man who'd helped my dad when his tractor broke down back in '89. Cole, he said quietly, glancing around as if afraid the trees might be listening. You ought to know Lydia's been saying you're refusing to cooperate. Says you're blocking community access. Says your brother's causing disturbances. Evan stiffened beside me, his hands curling on the wheels of his chair. Disturbances? He asked thinly. Fishing? Harold swallowed, nodding. Folks don't know what to believe. She's been talking to everyone. Meetings, gatherings, email lists. Says you're aggressive. Says you're threatening lawsuits. Says you're trying to privatize what's meant for everyone. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It's always been private. Always. I know, Harold said, eyes soft with sympathy. But she's convincing them, one by one. When he left, a long silence settled over the lake, the kind that makes you notice every little sound, the lapping of water against the rocks, the distant rumble of a tractor engine somewhere in the valley, the wind moaning through telephone wires. She's preparing something bigger, Evan finally said. I know. What do we do? I looked at the survey stakes, at the shoreline Lydia was trying to claim, at my brother, strong, stubborn, standing his ground even when the world tried to take it from him. We document everything, I said. Every letter, every visit, every lie. Evan nodded, determination replacing the worry in his eyes. But deep down I felt the shift, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy and electric. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was the prelude. Something was coming, and whatever it was, it wouldn't be small. The next wave hit 3 mornings later, just as the frost was burning off the grass, and a thin veil of mist hovered over Mercer Lake. I was tightening the bolts on the old wooden gate when a county truck rumbled up the drive, a white Ford with the seal of Clearwater County stamped on the door. It moved slow, deliberate, like it wasn't sure it belonged out here. Evan looked up from the dock, a trout already tugging at his line. You expecting someone? No, I said, wiping my hands on a cloth. But I can guess who sent them. The truck came to a stop, and a man stepped out, a county inspector in a faded jacket, clipboard under his arm. He looked like the kind of guy who preferred coffee over confrontation and would have rather inspected a roadside ditch than deal with whatever call brought him to our land. Morning? he said cautiously. I'm Jacob Riley, County Environmental Assessment Unit. Environmental? I echoed. What's the issue? He scanned his clipboard with a frown. We received multiple anonymous reports that recreational activity on this lake, he gestured toward Evan, may be causing contamination runoff into the groundwater feeding the subdivision. Evan gave him a look that would have melted steel. Recreational activity? I'm fishing, not running a chemical plant. Riley sighed, rubbing his forehead. Sir, I'm just here to follow procedure. The complaints were detailed, very detailed. Of course they were. Lydia always did her homework when she planned to weaponize somebody. I led Riley toward the shoreline while Evan set his rod aside, rolling closer to listen. The inspector crouched near the water, dipping a testing vial into the clear lake. The sun reflected off the surface in a silver shimmer, the kind of light that made the whole world look clean. This water's been crystal clear since before I was born, I said. My grandfather fed this lake from natural spring channels he dug with his own hands. Riley nodded, like he'd heard lines like that before, but his eyes told me he believed it. Well, he said, capping the sample, I'll run the tests. Could be nothing, but policies require I check both your lake and the upstream retention pond. My jaw tightened. The HOA pond? That's the one. Evan huffed a bitter laugh. You'll need a hazmat suit. Riley managed a faint smile before returning to his truck. As he drove off, dust lifted behind him, glowing gold in the rising sun. Cole, Evan said quietly. She's reaching. Hard. Yeah, I said, which means she's scared. That afternoon, while the wind rippled across the lake like it was brushing its fingers through the water, someone knocked at the front door. A soft, hesitant knock that didn't match the boldness of HOA patrols. I opened it to find Martha Collins, our retired neighbor from 2 lots down. White hair in a loose bun. Denim jacket older than the subdivision itself. The kind of woman who'd baked pies for funerals and never missed a Sunday church service in 40 years. She clutched a cardboard file box to her chest. Cole, she said, voice tight. I heard what happened this morning. You need to see something. She stepped inside, looking around like she expected someone to have followed her. When she set the box down on the kitchen table, dust puffed from the cardboard. I served on the HOA committee before Lydia got elected, she said. Back when we still ran things honest. I kept copies of everything, just in case. She opened the box, revealing old HOA newsletters, receipts, and meeting minutes. Some yellowed with age, some marked with red pen. But one file caught my eye, a folder labeled Willow Ridge Retention Maintenance. Contracts. Martha tapped a finger on it. Her husband owns the landscaping company that handles all the maintenance. Lydia pushed that contract through her first month in office. No bids, no oversight. Just handed it to him. I opened the folder. The invoices were staggering. Thousands of dollars charged each month for pond filtration, soil treatment, water level stabilization. Yet anyone who'd walked past that retention pond could see it was nothing more than a murky puddle with algae thick enough to walk on. She's been funneling HOA money to her husband, Martha said, and now she's trying to expand her reach. Evan wheeled to the table, scanning the documents. So this environmental complaint is a distraction, I finished. She's hiding something up there. That something became very clear 3 days later when Riley returned. He stepped out of his truck with a look that was half disbelief, half frustration. Mr. Mercer, he said, your lake water is cleaner than most municipal supplies. Low nitrates, clean mineral balance, no contaminants. Honestly, it's exceptional. Evan grinned. Told you. But the HOA retention pond? Riley shook his head. It's a mess. Fertilizer runoff, cleaning chemicals, sky-high bio-level contaminants. It shouldn't even be feeding into the watershed. I felt my stomach drop. And they accused us? Riley nodded grimly. I shouldn't be telling you this, but the reports against you didn't come from multiple sources like the paperwork said. They came from one person, same handwriting, same timestamps. Lydia. Always Lydia. And one more thing, Riley added, lowering his voice. That retention pond. It's showing signs of being tampered with, overtreated, overprocessed. Like someone's trying to fix something that's been broken for a long time. The wind picked up then, sliding across the lake's surface and flicking Riley's hair into his eyes. He looked out toward the water, then back at me. Mr. Mercer, someone is trying very hard to make your lake look guilty, and that usually means they've got something to hide. As he drove off, the clouds shifted, casting long shadows across the water. The air felt heavier, charged, the way it does before lightning strikes. Evan looked at me. Okay, this isn't just harassment anymore. No, I said quietly. This is strategy. And if Martha's right, Evan added, she's covering up something big. I stared out at the pristine water, still, unmarred, ours. Yeah, I murmured. Something she never expected us to uncover. The next move wouldn't come from her. It would come from us. But before we could strike back, we needed to understand the battlefield Lydia Harrow had quietly built around us. What looked like scattered harassment, random fines, environmental accusations, surprise inspections, wasn't random at all. It was a pattern, and patterns leave trails. The wind swept hard across Mercer Lake that morning, carrying a sharp bite that hinted winter wasn't too far off. Pine needles rattled against the gutters. The wooden dock groaned under the shifting water. It all sounded like the land itself was restless, waiting, urging us forward. Cole, Evan called from the porch. We've got visitors. Not Lydia. Not HOA patrol. Neighbors. 4 of them, to be exact, standing near the old iron gate like people who weren't sure if they were welcome, but were desperate enough to come anyway. I recognized them instantly. Folks I'd known for years. Folks who'd waved at us from across fence lines, shared coffee at the general store, borrowed tools now and then. But their faces, they were worn, anxious, guarded. I walked over and opened the gate. Cold wind rushed between us like it wanted to join the conversation. Y'all all right? I asked. Harold, the old rancher who'd warned us earlier, removed his hat and looked down at the dirt. We heard what happened with the inspector, he said. Figured, it's time we talked. Behind him stood the Kowalskis, a quiet couple in their 70s who tended a little vegetable patch behind their cottage. The Ruiz family, who owned the corner lot closest to the HOA playground. And Darla Hayes, a young mom with 2 toddlers, eyes red like she'd been crying. None of them looked like people who wanted a fight, but all of them looked like people who'd been wronged. We led them inside, the screen door creaking behind us. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Evan had brewed a fresh pot, though his hands trembled slightly as he poured. Darla was the first to speak. Her voice cracked. Lydia fined us $500 for a wooden toy house in our yard, she said, clutching her coffee mug. Said it was an unapproved structure. Then she told my husband if we kept resisting, she'd report us for running a daycare without permits. She said the same to us, Mrs. Kowalski added. Over our tomatoes. Said the vines were attracting rodents, bringing down property values. Threatened to involve the county health board. That's nothing, Harold muttered. She tried to buy my lakefront acres last year. I told her I wasn't selling. 2 weeks later, I'm hit with citations for livestock zoning violations. Been ranching the same way for 50 years, and suddenly it's illegal. The Ruiz family exchanged glances before Mr. Ruiz cleared his throat. She told us our fence was too high, he said quietly. We lowered it. Then she said it was too low and a security risk. When I asked for clarity, She said maybe our family would be happier living in a neighborhood without such strict rules. We all knew what that meant. I leaned back in my chair, heart tightening. She's pushing out everyone who doesn't fit her plan. Evan nodded. Everyone with waterfront. Everyone with older property. Everyone who can't fight. That's right, Harold said. Saw surveyors behind my barn last month. Thought it was a mistake. But now? He looked straight at me. She's divvying up the land. Darla wiped her eyes. She wants to build something big. Has to be. This isn't just about control. It's about money. I exchanged a look with Evan. Luxury marina expansion. The phrase hit me like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spreading. Everything suddenly making sense. I heard her talking at the last HOA meeting, Darla whispered, as if afraid of saying the words too loud. Said she had investors lined up. Said the neighborhood was an untapped waterfront opportunity. And she can't expand the marina, Evan said, unless she controls this lake. There it was. The truth bloomed across the room like a spark catching dry grass. This wasn't about rules, or standards, or aesthetics. This was a land grab, a manipulation scheme disguised as community improvement. Push out the elderly, intimidate the vulnerable, force compliance, buy cheap, sell high. We sat in silence for a long moment. The only sound was the wind whistling through a loose window pane and the distant chop of water against the dock pilings. Finally, Harold leaned forward, his voice steady. Cole, you Mercers have the deed, the legal claim, the lake. If she's doing what we think she is, you might be the only ones who can stop her. I didn't speak. Didn't have to. Because every person in that room already knew. We weren't just defending Mercer Lake. We were defending the people living around it. The ones being bullied, cornered, coerced. Evan rolled closer to the table, his voice firm. We'll fight this, all of us, but it has to be with proof, hard proof. Darla nodded. We'll share every letter, every fine, every threat. The Kowalskis offered to bring their entire HOA correspondence stack, years' worth of notices and photos. The Ruiz family promised to pull their inspection records. Harold stood, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. You tell us what you need, son. We're with you. They left one by one, returning to their homes under the low gray sky. And as the front door closed behind the last of them, I felt something settle in the air. Not the dread from before. Not helplessness. Something heavier, stronger. Like the shift of a herd preparing to stampede. Evan looked at me, eyes bright with determination. We're not alone anymore, he said. No, I replied, watching the wind whip across the lake. And that means Lydia just lost her biggest advantage. For the first time in weeks, the silence in the house felt different. Not eerie. Ready. Because the community she'd tried to divide was now gathering behind us. And Lydia Harrow had no idea that the people she pushed to the edge were about to push back. But predators rarely give up their hunt when cornered. They get desperate, reckless, dangerous in their own way. And Lydia was no different. The first crack in her composure came one cool, brittle morning when the wind blew off Silver Basin Lake with the chill of early winter. Frost laced the dock rails, the pine branches creaked under the weight of ice crystals, and the air carried the sharp metallic scent you smell in the mountains before a storm. Evan was already at the shore, fishing rod in hand, when the distant wail of a siren drifted over the valley. He stiffened. Cole, you hear that? My heart dropped. Again? The cruiser arrived faster this time, barreling down our gravel road like they were responding to a hostage situation. Lights blazing, tires skidding. A blast of dust and cold wind whipped across our yard as the sheriff's deputy leapt out, It wasn't the same crew from before. This time it was Deputy Andrews, a younger guy with a buzz cut and a stiff posture like his uniform had been ironed onto him. "Mr. Mercer," he barked, "we received reports of a resident brandishing a weapon near the community boundary." Evan blinked. "A weapon?" He lifted his fishing rod. "This one?" Andrews didn't smile. "Sir, we need to search the area." I was kneeling by the woodpile, splitting logs for the stove. My axe thunked into the stump as I straightened. "What exactly is Evan accused of?" I asked. Andrews flipped through his notes, voice flat. "Caller stated your brother was waving a firearm and threatening HOA residents walking on the trail." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Deputy, my brother can't even stand, and he's been sitting on that dock for the past hour, in a wheelchair." Andrews hesitated. His eyes flicked from Evan to the lake to the fishing gear scattered around. Confusion broke through his professional mask. "Sir," he murmured, "I'm starting to think you've been used." Evan finished for him. The deputy exhaled, irritation clear. He tapped his radio. "Dispatch, no firearm. Repeat, no weapon. Cancel backup." Then he turned to us. "This is the second false report in 2 weeks. I'll need to file documentation." "Please do," I said, "and include that it came from the same person." We all knew who. Andrews's jaw tightened. "This isn't what emergency services are for." He apologized, climbed back into his cruiser, and drove off slowly this time. Headlights dimmed, no siren. The dust cloud settled on the frozen grass like a blanket of dull brown snow. When he was gone, Evan whispered, "She's losing it." "No," I replied. "She's escalating." We didn't have to wait long to see how far she was willing to go. Later that afternoon, after the frost had melted and the wind carried the scent of wet dirt and pine, a new envelope appeared on our porch. Crisp, white, stamped with the Willow Ridge HOA seal. I didn't even need to open it to know the contents, but I opened it anyway. Final notice. Failure to cooperate. HOA Code 4.22. Disruptive behavior. HOA Code 6.17. Unauthorized structures. HOA Code 8.91. Community threats, community threats. That one made my blood run hot. I scanned the letter twice, then handed it to Evan. "So now I'm a threat?" he said softly, eyes narrowing. "That's exactly what she wants people to believe." I needed answers, proof, something solid enough to crush every lie she'd spun. And that meant getting my hands on the documents she refused to release. HOA budgets, maintenance logs, contracts, insurance claims, all the places real corruption hides. So, that evening, when the sun dipped behind the mountains and cast long shadows across the lake, I walked down the path to Martha Collins's cottage. Her porch light flickered like an old lantern guiding lost travelers home. She opened the door before I even knocked. Her gray hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with worry. "I figured you'd come," she said quietly. She led me inside where a small lamp glowed over a cluttered table filled with binders, envelopes, and the old cardboard box she'd brought earlier. She opened a smaller container, a shoebox wrapped in twine, and pushed it toward me. "You'll want to see these," she said. Inside were flash drives, dozens of them. "For years," Martha whispered, "I backed up HOA files myself. Minutes, budgets, approvals, everything that crossed Lydia's desk. She always hated that I kept copies." She handed me one marked with a red sticker. "Start with this." Back home, I inserted the drive into my laptop. Evan rolled up beside me as the screen filled with PDFs, financial summaries, payment logs, expense reports. And right there in black and white was the beginning of the truth. 6 years of missing budgets. Thousands spent on lakefront structure repairs that never happened. Checks paid to Harrow Land and Landscape, Lydia's husband's company. Invoices for amenities that did not exist. It was a web of lies. A maze of numbers designed to confuse anyone who didn't know better. But I knew better. "This is fraud," Evan muttered, plain as day. "And the charges she filed against us?" I said. "A smokescreen." We scrolled through file after file. More phantom expenses, more fake projects, more signs that Lydia wasn't just abusing power. She was covering up something massive. I leaned back in my chair, breath shallow. "Evan." "Yeah? If the budgets are fake, what about the insurance claims?" Evan looked at me, eyes widening. "Oh, Cole," he whispered. "This might be a whole lot bigger than we thought." Outside, the wind howled against the windowpane like something alive. And in that moment, we both understood. The harassment wasn't the story. The story was what she was trying to bury. And by the time we uncovered the first layer of truth, it felt like we were pulling on a loose thread in an old sweater. One tug, and the whole thing threatened to unravel into a pile of corruption no one was meant to see. It all started the morning after we'd gone through Martha's thumb drive. The lake was still, almost unnaturally still. The surface flat as glass, except for a single ripple from a trout rising near the reeds. Clouds hung low over the valley, casting a gray veil that blurred the pines into soft shadows. It was the kind of silence that holds its breath. Evan rolled out onto the dock, a blanket draped over his lap, the bite of early winter sharp in the air. "Cole," he said, watching the lake. "If she's lying about the budgets, she's lying about the insurance, too." He was right. I dialed Reed Halston, our family lawyer, a steady man in his 50s with the patience of a preacher and the accuracy of a surveyor. Reed didn't waste time with small talk. As soon as he walked through the front door that afternoon, brushing snowflakes from his coat, I could see the seriousness in his eyes. "Martha said you had something," he said. We led him into the living room, where the documents were spread across the coffee table, printouts, screenshots, spreadsheets, and invoices from Harrow Land and Landscape. Reed studied them silently, his finger tracing lines of numbers. "These maintenance logs," he murmured. "These aren't real. No signatures, no verification. And these payments, too consistent, too neat." Evan stopped him. "What about the insurance claims? Can you access them?" Reed nodded slowly. "Not directly. But the HOA is required by Montana state law to file all major claims publicly through the county. If she filed anything over $50,000, it'll be on record." He pulled out his laptop, fingers tapping quickly across the keyboard. Snow pressed softly against the windows as the wind picked up, whispering around the house like a restless visitor. After a minute, Reed froze. "Oh," he breathed. "Oh my God." He turned the screen toward us. There they were. Insurance claim 88247. Storm damage to community dock structures, $430,000, insurance claim. Vandalism, repair to lakeside facilities, $275,000, insurance claim, 8951, flooding damage to HOA. Marina slips, $610,000. I scanned the descriptions, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. "Community dock structures?" I muttered. "There are no community docks. There's only our dock." Reed clicked another entry. Insurance claim 90132. Fire damage to Lakeshore Activity Center, $360,000. Evan let out a dry laugh. "What activity center? There's not even a picnic table." "And this one," Reed said, pointing. Insurance claim 91776. Structural restoration of shared lake retaining walls, $690,000. My stomach nodded. Retaining walls that didn't exist. Buildings that never stood. Storm damage that never happened. Vandalism no one ever saw. Reed clicked to the summary page. Total claims filed over the last 5 years, $4,000, $30,000, he said quietly. The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the fireplace. Evan's hands tightened on his wheels. She used our shoreline, he said. She had to. That's why she wants our lake, so she can keep filing these claims like they're real. Reed nodded grimly. She forged map overlays, used altered GIS coordinates. The insurance companies approved the claims because they believed the HOA owned the waterfront structures she listed. I felt a cold wave wash through me, not the kind that comes from winter air, but the kind that comes from betrayal and realization. She's been stealing, I said softly. Millions. Not from us, yet, but from insurance companies and from the people who trusted her. And when the retention pond started failing, Evan added, she blamed us to cover it up. Reed leaned back, rubbing his temples. This is a federal crime. Wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, false filings, easily enough for a long sentence. Outside, a gust of wind slammed into the house, rattling the loose pane in the kitchen. The lake shivered under the pressure, breaking the glassy surface into trembling lines. But there's more, Reed said, opening another document. Look at these signatures. He zoomed in on one. Lakeshore Activity Center Repair, approved by HOA President Lydia Harrow. The handwriting was clean, too clean, perfectly consistent across multiple forms, no natural variation, and her husband's signature appeared on every completion verification. Evan let out a low whistle. She didn't even try to hide it. Reed exhaled slowly. People who feel untouchable get sloppy. I stared at the screen, the truth sinking into my bones. The harassment, the boundary dispute, the 911 calls, the fake violations, all of it, every humiliating, infuriating, absurd moment served one purpose: protect the $4 million empire she built on lies, and she wasn't done yet. She needs our lake, Evan said, for the next phase. Reed nodded. Investors don't fund developments unless the HOA controls the land. She's trying to force a legal fiction into reality. If she pushes you out, she gets everything, I finished. Every claim, every contract, every expansion, every dollar. We sat there, the three of us, while the wind howled down off the ridge like an ancient warning. Finally, Reed closed the laptop with a quiet click. Cole, he said, we need to take this to the state attorney general and the FBI. I looked out at the lake, its waters darkening under the storm clouds, as if reflecting what we'd just learned. Do it, I said. Evan lifted his chin. And whatever happens next, we're ready. The storm outside broke then, rain tapping against the windows, wind whipping across the shoreline, the lake churning under the weight of the sky. But it wasn't the weather I felt closing in. It was the end of Lydia Harrow's world, and the beginning of her reckoning. But endings don't fall all at once. They crumble, bit by bit, like the edge of a cliff losing soil until the whole ledge gives way. And as the truth spilled into our hands, that cliff under Lydia was eroding fast. The morning after Reed uncovered the $4 million in fraudulent claims, the weather shifted again. A thin fog hugged the lake as if hiding it from what was coming. The air carried the clean scent of wet pine and cold earth, a stillness that settled into your skin. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. Reed arrived early, his breath fogging in front of him as he stepped out of his truck. He carried a leather briefcase stuffed with printed evidence. Everything's ready, he said. The AG's office will review our file, but the real weight comes from the FBI. This kind of fraud crosses state lines. Evan wheeled up behind me, which means we've got one shot to make this airtight. We do, Reed said, and we will. We met inside the kitchen, where sunlight filtered weakly through frost-lined windows, casting long, pale streaks across the wooden table. Reed connected his laptop and initiated a secure call with a contact he'd worked with years earlier, someone who specialized in white-collar crimes. Special Agent Marissa Dane. Her face appeared on the screen. Sharp eyes, hair pulled back, voice clipped and professional. She listened without interrupting as Reed laid out everything. The fake claims, forged signatures, bogus maintenance logs, GIS manipulations, environmental scare tactics, false emergency calls. When he finished, Agent Dane spoke quietly. "Mr. Mercer, Mr. Mercer," she repeated, nodding toward both of us. "I need you to understand something. This isn't small. This is organized fraud. And from what I'm seeing, the scale suggests a pattern, one that usually leads to deeper violations." Evan crossed his arms. "So you think this goes beyond the insurance money?" "It almost always does," Agent Dane said. "People who steal this much rarely keep it simple." Her tone sent a chill through the room. Not fear, validation. We weren't imagining things. Lydia hadn't just overstepped. She'd built a criminal enterprise. "Here's how we move forward," she continued. "We'll need to set up quiet surveillance. No confrontations, no warnings. Let her think she's still in control." I met Evan's eyes. "We can do that." "And whatever she does next," Agent Dane added, "record it, document it. Every move she makes will help us build this case." She ended the call with a final reminder. "Stay calm. Let her act. We're watching now." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the wind shift in our favor. But Lydia wasn't done, not even close. That afternoon, after Reed left for meetings in Helena, Evan and I were stacking firewood beside the workshop when a rust-red sedan rolled slowly past our gate. The driver, a stranger, held a camera with a lens long enough to photograph a license plate from 50 yards. Evan frowned. "You know him?" "No." The sedan passed by again an hour later, then a third time, then stopped at the end of the drive, engine idling. The man inside pretended to look at his phone, but the camera pointed straight at our house. "Private investigator," Evan muttered, "or someone Lydia hired to dig for anything she can twist." We were right. A day later, another envelope appeared, this one taped crookedly to the door, flapping in the cold wind. "Urgent notice. Property damage and community endangerment. Mandatory hearing scheduled." Evan stared at it. "She doesn't even care if these look believable anymore." "She's panicking," I said, "and panicking people make mistakes." Around sunset, Martha called. "You boys, listen carefully," she whispered. "Something's happening at the HOA office." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" "I saw lights inside after dark, movement, and Lydia's husband backed his truck up to the door. They're loading boxes." Evan's eyes lit with realization. "She's destroying records." Martha exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry. I couldn't get closer. But I know what I saw." "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing." We hung up. Evan tapped his fingers against his wheels. "Think the FBI's got eyes on them already?" "They said they would," I answered. "But let's give them a heads up." I messaged Agent Dane through the secure channel. Her reply came fast. "We're monitoring. Do not intervene. Cameras in place." A rush of relief went through me. But even with surveillance, Lydia escalated again the next morning, this time with something brazen enough to make Deputy Andrews return for the third time in a week. "Mr. Mercer," he began, eyes tired. "She filed another complaint. Says you're vandalizing HOA property." "What property?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The community office." He looked at his clipboard. "Spray paint, broken glass, tools left at the scene, paint cans with your initials." "My initials?" I repeated. Deputy Andrews shifted uneasily. She's demanding an investigation. Normally I'd dismiss it, but what? He lowered his voice. Paint cans and a crowbar were found under your truck. The world went still. The lake, the wind, the trees, everything froze in place. Evan's voice broke the silence. She planted them. Deputy Andrews nodded almost imperceptibly. I can't say that. But I can say the timing doesn't make sense, and the items didn't match recent weather exposure. They looked placed. You don't believe her, I said. I believe she's got an agenda, he answered carefully. And I believe you're being set up. He left to file the report, tires crunching over hardened patches of snow. Evan rolled toward me. She's losing control. She's digging her own grave, I said quietly. Because what Lydia didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the FBI had already caught her husband dumping shredded documents into trash bags, already photographed her midnight shredding session, already tracked her manipulations and fabricated violations. And now she'd given them the biggest gift of all, a staged crime, with falsified evidence, caught on surveillance she didn't know existed. The lake wind rose, sweeping across the basin, rattling the branches overhead. The sky darkened with the promise of another storm. Evan watched the clouds gather. Agent Dane said to let her act. Then let her, I said, because the more she thrashes, the faster she sinks. And with every false report, every planted item, every lie, Lydia Harrow wasn't just exposing her corruption. She was writing the final chapter of her own downfall. But she didn't know that yet. The next 48 hours moved with the slow, heavy tension of a storm front pressing against the valley. The air carried an uneasy electricity, sharp, metallic, charged. Silver Basin Lake reflected a sky bruised with cloud cover, while the wind dragged long ripples across its surface. Even the pines along the ridge swayed with a nervous rhythm, as though nature itself sensed what was coming. On the third morning, a handwritten notice appeared on every mailbox in Willow Ridge, including those miles from the HOA office. Emergency HOA meeting. Mandatory attendance. Subject: Community Defense Fund and legal action against disruptive residents. Darla texted us immediately. So did Harold, and the Kowalskis. Even neighbors who usually kept to themselves messaged us, anxious and uncertain. Evan wheeled beside the window, reading the notice aloud again. Legal action against disruptive residents, he said. That's us. Not for long, I replied. This is her last swing. We arrived at the HOA clubhouse, a squat beige building at the edge of the subdivision, right as dusk settled, tinting the parking lot in pale lavender light. Snow crunched beneath our boots. Inside, the room buzzed with fear and confusion. Folded chairs lined the walls. Neighbors huddled in clusters, murmuring. And then Lydia swept in. Her heels clicked loudly across the laminate floor, each step a declaration. She wore a pressed cobalt blazer, hair pulled tight enough to sharpen her features into angles. But beneath the polished exterior was something brittle, something cracking. She grabbed the microphone with shaking fingers. Residents, she began, forcing her voice into a smooth cadence. We are under attack by individuals attempting to undermine this community. We must unite to protect Willow Ridge. Murmurs rippled across the room. Under attack? Someone whispered. What does she mean? Another asked. Lydia raised a stack of papers dramatically. These, she hissed, are expenses we must cover to defend ourselves. Vandalism repairs, legal fees, emergency services misuse, and unless we approve a $30,000 special assessment per household, this community could collapse. Gasps broke out. 30,000? She's lost her mind. We can't afford that. The Kowalskis exchanged horrified looks. Darla covered her mouth. Even Harold muttered a curse under his breath. Evan leaned toward me. She's panicking. Yeah, I whispered. She feels the net closing. Lydia slammed her fist on the podium. This assessment is non-negotiable. Anyone refusing to pay will face property liens and removal of HOA privileges. That did it. A noise rippled through the crowd. Anger, disbelief, defiance. Someone stood and demanded to see the documents. Someone else asked why there had been no transparency for months. A third neighbor shouted, "Where did all the money go?" Lydia's composure cracked. "I have operated with complete integrity," she snapped. "Any accusations to the contrary are malicious lies spread by troublemakers, like the Mercers." Every head turned toward us. Evan didn't flinch. He rolled forward, positioning himself under the fluorescent lights. His voice, calm but unwavering, carried across the room. "Tell them the truth, Lydia." Her face twisted. "Which truth is that?" "The truth about the $4 million you stole." The room went silent. Absolutely silent. Then footsteps thundered behind us. A sharp command echoed. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" The doors burst open, and FBI agents and sheriff deputies poured into the clubhouse. Their presence cut through the air with the weight of finality. Neighbors stepped back instinctively as agents moved past them with purpose. Lydia froze, half-turned, half-raising her hands like a deer caught in the crosshairs of its own lies. "Lydia Harrow?" Agent Dane stepped forward, her badge glinting in the harsh light. "You are under federal investigation for wire fraud, insurance fraud, falsifying public records, misuse of emergency services, and attempted evidence tampering." A stunned silence swept through the crowd. "What?" someone gasped. "Insurance fraud?" another whispered. Lydia sputtered. "This is a mistake. My husband. He can explain." Right on cue, Richard Harrow stepped into the room from behind the agents. His face was pale, eyes downcast, hands trembling as he held a thick envelope. "Lydia," he whispered, voice cracking, "I'm sorry." She stared at him, color draining from her cheeks. "What did you do?" "I cooperated," he said. "They have everything." He handed the envelope to Agent Dane. Inside were years of documents Lydia thought she'd destroyed. Backups Richard had kept out of fear or guilt, maybe both. "This is betrayal!" Lydia shrieked. "No," Richard whispered. "This is justice." Two agents stepped forward. "Ma'am, turn around!" Lydia screamed as they cuffed her, her voice spiraling into the air like the cry of a dying creature. "You can't do this! I built this community! I made this place!" "No," Darla said softly from the crowd, tears shining in her eyes. "You poisoned it." The deputies escorted Lydia through the center aisle. Cameras flashed from reporters who must have been tipped off by the FBI. Neighbors watched with a mixture of shock, relief, and anger. As she passed us, Lydia locked eyes with Evan. "You did this," she spat. Evan held her gaze calmly, the strength of a man who'd survived worse than an angry HOA president. "No," he said quietly. "You did." They led her out into the cold night. Agent Dane approached us, offering a small nod. "We'll need full statements tomorrow. But for now, it's over." Evan exhaled shakily, gripping his wheels. "What happens to the HOA?" "That," Dane said, glancing at the stunned room, "is up to the community." As she walked away, a profound silence filled the clubhouse, different from before. Not fearful, not tense. A silence of release. A silence of justice settling into place. Harold finally stepped forward, voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "What about the lake?" he asked. I looked around at the faces, scared, hopeful, exhausted. "The lake, as our Uncle Sawud, is going back to what it always was, ours." And for the first time in months, the air inside Willow Ridge felt clean. The collapse of the HOA queen wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dramatic in the way Lydia imagined power would protect her. It was quiet, methodical, inevitable, like the closing of a heavy wooden door at the end of a long, long storm. That's what the night of Lydia Harrow's arrest felt like. An ending settling into place, echoing across the valley even after the agents and deputies cleared out. But what none of us knew then was that the morning after would feel like something else entirely. A beginning. The next dawn over Silver Basin Lake rose slow and gentle, as if the world itself wanted to breathe again. Mist drifted across the water like pale smoke, curling around the dock posts and dissolving into the new sunlight. The air smelled clean, pine sap, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of thawing frost. For the first time in months, I felt the land relax beneath my feet. Evan was already outside, wheeling down the wooden path toward the dock. His breath curled in small white puffs. The quiet hum of his chair sounded more like part of the lake's rhythm now, soft, steady, grounding. He paused at the edge of the dock, the water reflecting gold beneath him. "Feels different," he murmured. "It does," I said. "Calmer. Lighter," he added, "like the lake finally has room to breathe." Behind us, neighbors trickled down the path. Harold in his weathered coat, Darla holding her toddler's hand, the Kowalskis walking arm in arm. They came like people approaching a church after too long away, hushed, reverent, almost unsure. I didn't blame them. This lake had been a battleground, a target, a tool. Now, it could finally be what it always was, ours. Reed arrived next, stepping out of his truck with papers tucked into a thick folder. He nodded toward the crowd. "Court hearing set," he said. "Federal prosecutors are moving fast." "How fast?" Evan asked. Faster than she ever expected. 3 weeks passed in a blur of legal reviews, community statements, and financial audits. And when the day of the hearing arrived, we drove to Helena under a powder blue sky streaked with ribbons of cloud. The courthouse stood tall with its granite pillars and brass railings, smelling of polished stone and old paper. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters whispered into microphones. The judge, stern, silver-haired, eyes like polished steel, sat with the authority of a man who'd seen a lifetime of justice battles and had no patience for lies. When Lydia entered, escorted by federal marshals, the room hushed. The woman who once strutted across HOA meetings with perfect posture now looked small in her orange jumpsuit. The fluorescent lights revealed every crack in her carefully constructed armor, smudged makeup, loose strands of hair, a tremor in her hands. Her attorney spoke for her. She said nothing. The prosecutor stood and presented the findings with the calm weight of an avalanche. $4 million in fraudulent insurance claims, imaginary repairs, falsified maps, forged signatures, destruction of records, documented harassment of residents, misuse of emergency services, retaliation against vulnerable homeowners, and the attempted framing of a disabled veteran. With each charge, Lydia's shoulders curled inward, her eyes flicking around the room like she was searching for someone to blame, someone to save her. But no one moved. Then the judge spoke, his voice steady, resonant. "Mrs. Harrow, this community trusted you. You repaid them with fear, manipulation, and criminal deception. And before this court, the truth stands taller than any authority you once claimed." He sentenced her to 13 years in federal prison, restitution of $4 million, and forfeiture of property assets tied to fraudulent gain. Murmurs rippled through the room, not cheers, not triumph, but a different sound. Relief, the kind that hums through a crowd like the first warm breeze before spring. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but it was Evan who caught their attention. He sat tall in his chair, sunlight reflecting off his medals pinned to his jacket, his voice steady and warm as he spoke. I didn't fight for this country to lose my home to lies, and I didn't lose my legs to be treated like less than a neighbor. What we did wasn't about revenge. It was about ending fear. For my family, for this community, for anybody who's been pushed into silence. His words carried across the marble steps, across the crowd, across the cameras, and across Montana. The weeks after the sentencing felt like breathing fresh mountain air after months underwater. The new HOA board, led by level-headed neighbors with nothing to gain, voted unanimously to dissolve all fraudulent contracts and implement financial transparency. They held meetings in the open, under string lights by the lakeshore, where the community gathered without tension for the first time in years. We repaired the dock, sanding down the timber and adding new posts where winter storms had worn the old ones rough. The sound of the hammer striking wood echoed across the lake like a heartbeat returning. Neighbors helped. Even folks who had once avoided us out of fear came forward with support. One afternoon, Darla brought her kids to learn fishing from Evan. He showed them how to cast without snagging their clothes, how to feel the line tighten with a fish's interest, how to breathe with the rhythm of the water. Patience, he told them, smiling. Fishing teaches patience and healing. The Kowalskis donated their old wooden bench to the dock. Harold brought us fresh eggs every morning. Martha, bless her heart, became a local hero. Her evidence sealed most of the case. People brought her casseroles and flowers for months. As for Mercer Lake, we put up a new sign at the trail entrance, carved into cedar, varnished to shine in the sun. Mercer Lake open to friends, closed to bullies. Neighbors celebrated with an outdoor barbecue by the water. Smoke from the grills drifted into the breeze, mingling with laughter, crackling firewood, and the nostalgic sound of country music playing from an old radio. Children ran along the shoreline. Families fished from the dock. People who had once felt isolated now stood shoulder to shoulder. And in that moment, I knew. The lake had never been the problem. The lake had never been the prize. The lake was the heart. And hearts, once defended, beat stronger. As the sun set behind the ridge, painting the water in bands of pink and gold, Evan and I sat side by side on the dock, him in his wheelchair, me with my boots dangling above the water. "Think Grandpa would be proud?" he asked softly. I looked at the lake, our lake, glittering under the fading light. "He'd be proud we protected what he loved," I said, "but he'd be even prouder we protected the people around it." Evan nodded, eyes reflecting the shimmering colors. "Feels like justice." "Justice," I agreed, "and a new beginning." The wind carried our voices across the lake, quiet and steady. And in that stillness, in that final light of a long winter finally breaking, I felt something settle deep and true. Some storms come to destroy. Others come to clear the air. Mercer Lake was finally breathing again. And so were we. If you've ever stood your ground against an HOA or anyone who tried to push you off what's yours, drop a simple justice in the comments so folks know they're not alone. And if you want more stories about fighting back with truth, grit, and a whole lot of heart, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more coming your way.